Hey guys, it's me, Saran. I'm back with another video. Um, this is a video that I've been wanting to make for a while, that I hadn't gotten around to making, and now I'm actually glad that it took me a while to make this one, because I'm gonna frame it around some recent police killings. I originally got the idea to make this video while reading some articles about the Mike Brown Ferguson case, and since then, two more fairly high-profile shootings have occurred. The death of John Crawford in Ohio and the death of Darien Hunt in Utah. Those have both happened since, Mike Brown and since the things that have gone on in Ferguson. So please don't anyone think that that was an isolated incident. That's a narrative that I kind of keep hearing, like, oh, what if that was an isolated incident? What if that was just, one bad cop, one bad apple? But then you have shootings still happening and shootings still occurring. So clearly this isn't an isolated incident. This is a pattern. It's a pattern of police brutality. It's a pattern of racial profiling. It's a pattern of racism. It's not an isolated incident. It's a pattern. It's systematic. It's a way of life. So this video is going to be about white guilt, innocence, and the legacy of slavery, and it's going to be framed around these two most recent shootings, the shootings of John Crawford and Darien Hunt. So this video was initially inspired by by multiple comments really, but one in particular that I saw on lots of articles regarding Mike Brown and Ferguson. And a lot of these comments that were left by white people kind of tended towards white people feeling victimized and white people feeling like they're being unfairly victimized. As I said, kind of brushing off that this is a pattern, and instead saying, well, these are isolated incidents, these are just bad cops, these are not all white people aren't like this, white privilege doesn't exist, racism isn't systematic, our society is post-racial, and I just came out to have a good time, and honestly I'm feeling so attacked right now type of comments. And one in particular stood out to me. I wrote it down because the article itself wasn't anything special, just another news piece on Mike Brown and Ferguson, but the comment really stood out to me. The comment said, "Not all white people are evil, or racist. White infants are born innocent and should not be required to carry the burden of their ancestors." And by the burden of their ancestors, this person meant slavery, slave masters and slave owners. So I'm just going to read it again. "Not all whites are evil or racist. White infants are born innocent and should not be required to carry the burden of their ancestors." And the reason why this comment really stood out to me is because slavery and the legacies of slavery are still very much apparent in our culture. And, nothing makes that more clear than the criminalization of black bodies in our society. Walking while black, driving a car while black, driving a nice car while black, walking in a nice neighborhood, while black, going in a store while black and having someone follow you around because they think you're trying to steal, talking back to a police officer while black, getting into a fight while black, smoking weed while black. All these things are criminalized, and in the examples of the things that are illegal, like smoking weed, they're criminalized to a higher level, to a higher degree than they are for white people. And it's really just a criminalization of our blackness and of our black skin. We're immediately seen as suspicious figures, as criminals, as doing something wrong because we're black. So I found it offensive. Like, I understood what this commenter was saying, because really it sounds like it makes sense, right? White children are born innocent. All children are born innocent, But at the same time, I found it really offensive to say that white infants are born innocent and should not be required to carry the burden of their ancestors when black children are not afforded innocence. Black bodies, boys and girls, are criminalized from a very young age, We're given the talk at a young age about what to do, how to react if you're pulled over, if you're stopped by a cop. 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds know that if they see a police officer, they should put their hands up, or they should hold their hands where the cop can see them. They should be quiet. They should just listen, These are echoes of Jim Crow, when in the Jim Crow era, a cop stopped you and, you were just quiet. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, boss. No, no, boss. Where are your papers? Show me your papers. These are all echoes of that era in our society, in today's society, Black children are not afforded innocence. From the day we're born with our black and brown skin, we're criminalized and we're seen as criminals. So to say that white children are innocent and should not be required to carry the burden of their ancestors, it just smacks of white supremacy and white privilege to me. The only reason why a white person would even have the gall to make such a statement is because of white privilege. It's because they feel like they should be able to step outside of their race. This whole race doesn't matter, woo, 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 blah, blah, blah. You can only say that when you have the benefit of the doubt already, when you have the privilege already, when you already have the belief that your race doesn't matter, even though it does. Black people know that race matters. We know that race colors literally our interactions with everyone that we come into contact with every day. Black boys know from a young age that when they walk past a white person in a car, 9 times out of 10, that person's going to lock their doors. When they walk past a white lady or they get in an elevator with a white lady, 9 times out of 10, she's going to clutch her purse. So where is that black child, infant, grown up, grown man, adult? Where is that black person's innocence? Why is that black person required to carry the burden of their ancestors, which, who are slaves? And yet you feel like white people should not be required to carry the burden of their ancestors, which is the slave masters, even though white people are benefiting to this day from white privilege. So you're able to benefit from the burden of your ancestors. You're able to benefit from your white slave owning masters that got all the land and all the wealth and all the power. You're able to benefit from being a majority in this country, in the United States, because your people came here from Europe. They colonized this country. They murdered, they committed mass genocide against the Native Americans and took over. So you're the majority. You have the power. You're benefiting from that every day. You're benefiting from having the most elected officials every day. You're benefiting from having laws made to suit you. The Constitution, which originally, stated that black people were only 3/5 of a person, yet they claim our country was founded on freedom and religious freedom and rights for everyone, even though that's really not what our country was founded on. It was founded on rights for the white male, not even the white woman, but strictly the white male. And you're still benefiting from that to this day. You're benefiting from that. You have a leg up. You already have the idea of innocence. And this brings me to Darien Hunt, who was recently killed. I want to say last week he was murdered. He was shot 4 times in the back by the police in Utah because he was carrying a sword. He was carrying a katana, which is an Asian weapon. It's really popular in animes and mangas and comic books and things like that. And Darien Hunt was a cosplayer. He was a black cosplayer, and there have been reports that he was cosplaying, which I'm inclined to believe because your average person doesn't just walk around carrying a katana. And his mother has also made a statement saying that her son was a cosplayer and did carry his katana as a part of his, Japanese cosplay. So he's walking down the street. He's minding his own business. He's not hurting anyone. There have been images of him that were taken directly before his death where you can see what he's wearing and how his hair is, and it looks like he's cosplaying and he has the sword, the katana. And he's walking down the street and someone sees him and finds him suspicious and calls the police. A suspicious man with a sword just walked past me. What made Darien Hunt suspicious? Was it the fact that he had the sword? Or was it the fact that he was a black man carrying the sword? Did his black skin automatically criminalize him to the point where you saw him with the sword and you felt afraid for your life? Even though he didn't stop, he didn't talk to anyone, he didn't touch anyone, he didn't harm anyone, yet and still, him minding his own business, someone found that suspicious. Meanwhile, white people cosplay every day. I've seen, I'm into cosplaying and sci-fi and fantasy and stuff like that, as I've said in other, videos. And white people they cosplay every day with no ramifications, The dude that did end up shooting the theater in Aurora, Colorado at the Dark Knight premiere, he walked into the theater in full tactical gear, bulletproof vests and guns and all kind of stuff. And no one, kind of blinked. No one batted an eyelash because they assumed he was cosplaying. And there were other people as well dressed up for the Dark Knight premiere. Ignore the dogs. They're assholes. There were other people dressed up as well for the Dark Knight premiere, dressed as Bane, dressed as Batman, I've gone to Lord of the Rings premieres and people were dressed up, other Batman premieres, people were dressed up, Max Payne premieres, white people dressed up, brandishing swords and guns and knives, and no one feels afraid. Why? Because they're white. Because in their white skin, they're already carrying that white privilege. In our skin, we're already carrying the burden of slavery and the burden of racism. So we're automatically criminalized and seen as suspicious. John Crawford, who was shot in a Walmart in Ohio, he's talking on the phone holding a toy BB gun. A white dude feels afraid because he sees a black man with a weapon, completely disregarding whether or not the weapon is fake. This man feels threatened. He calls the police. He says, hey, there's a black guy in this Walmart, proceeding to lie because that's how afraid he felt. He lied on the 911 call. He said, this guy has an AR-15. He's attempting to load it. He's waving it around, pointing it at children. I'm afraid for my life. Please come. The police responded. They shot John Crawford in the middle of the Walmart. They didn't attempt to read him his rights. They didn't attempt to arrest him. They didn't attempt to bring him in peacefully. The same thing with Darien Hunt. The dude that shot up the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, he killed 12 people and injured 70 more. He's sitting in a sanitarium right now because they brought him in alive. They read him his rights. They arrested him. He was given the privilege of being arrested, okay? Because now we're talking about privileges and not rights. Because things that are meant to be rights, human rights, in this country, civil rights, you have the right to an attorney, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to know your rights. These rights, these First Amendment rights, as we see in Ferguson, you have the right to peacefully assemble. These rights are being taken away from us. Even the Second Amendment, you have the right to bear arms. If you're black, these are not rights. These are privileges. These are suggestions. They're not rights. They're not inalienable rights. Clearly, they're privileges, they're suggestions that can be taken away from us at any moment. As we see time after time, again and again, police are coming, they're shooting. They're shooting first and asking questions later. They're not giving anyone their rights. Yet, if you're white, if you carry that white privilege, if you carry that privilege in your skin, that privilege of innocence, that assumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty. If you're white, you have that. And what is that? That is a legacy from slavery. That is a leftover from slavery, from the Jim Crow era, from racism, from systematic oppression. These are leftovers and legacies. And yet, when someone presents you with these facts, white people have a tendency to get defensive and say, well, that's not fair. We were all born innocent. We shouldn't be required to carry the legacy and the burden of our ancestors. We shouldn't have to deal with it. That's not fair. But it's like, we carry the burden of slavery because institutionalized racism, systematic oppression, and the echoes and the legacies of slavery just remain to this day, and in white privilege and in white supremacy, White privilege isn't a choice, And for us, for black people, carrying the burden of slavery in our skin is not a choice. This is present in all of our daily lives. If you're white and you're out there acting a fool, you can rest assured that you're not going to be shot. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be given your rights as a human being. You're going to be arrested. You're going to be, read your rights. You're going to be given a lawyer. You're going to go to court. For us, those are privileges that we may or may not get, We're playing a game with our lives every day because we just don't know. And the reason why white people run from this and don't want to talk about it and feel like it's unfair is because they're guilty. And now we're getting into white guilt, right? We all know what it feels like to be guilty. You do something wrong and you feel guilty. So what's the first thing you do? You possibly lie about it, pretend it didn't happen, blame it on somebody else, And these are all tactics that we see white people taking day after day to kind of avoid their guilt and their compliance in racism, in the racism that is still prevalent to this day. You see the victim blaming, well, what was he doing carrying the sword? Why was he holding the BB gun in Walmart? Why didn't Mike Brown just do what the cops said and comply? Why was Trayvon Martin wearing a hoodie? Why did Venetia McBride knock on that man's door in the middle of the night? We see this victim blaming, and like I said, we just see this running away because no one wants to face the fact that I am white and I do receive privileges and I do benefit from systematic oppression, because then you're doing something wrong. And then you have to work and take steps to change it, because if you don't work and take steps to change it, then you're probably just a shitty person and a racist. No one wants to admit that about themselves, so they just try to ignore it. They feel white guilt because they are aware that they benefit from white privilege, and this is a legacy, this is a leftover from slavery. Just like we are constantly getting stopped and harassed and killed and gunned down by the police, and this is our legacy from slavery. Our race is criminalized inherently, and white people are made out to be innocent and saviors, better, smarter, superior. From the time white children are born, statistics show they're more likely to go to better schools, they're more likely to get better jobs, they're more likely to get better opportunities. If they are arrested for doing something wrong, they're less likely to be charged with a felony. They're more likely to be hit with a slap on the wrist and let go. They're more likely to be given chance after chance after chance. They are more likely to have money. They are more likely to have wealth. And all this comes from, one, the genocide against the Native Americans, to, I might even include the mistreatment of the Chinese Americans that came here and built the Intercontinental Railroad. And three, the benefits of slavery, which went on for 400 years and literally built this country. White people are naturally, inherently benefiting from victimizing minorities and people of color. Like, that's your truth. Accept it, deal with it, live with it, grow from it, learn from it, and actively work to combat it. That's all any of you white people can do. And that's also all we can do, is to keep striving for justice, But burying your heads in the sand and saying white privilege doesn't exist and we're post-race and we're post-racial and white infants are born innocent and should not be required to carry the burden of their ancestors. It's just like, whoa, no, you're living in the white bubble again, the white reality, and you need to wake up because, as far as I'm concerned, we're headed towards something big. I don't know if it's going to be, anarchy but the fact that people are protesting, they're still, it's been 38 days since Michael Brown was killed, and they're still protesting in Ferguson to this day at this moment. There's the group Lost Voices, which are still out there. They're sleeping out there. They have tents. They have the Lost City. They're protesting John Crawford's death. They're protesting Darien's death. It's come out that the dude that called the police on John Crawford, he lied. John Crawford wasn't loading an AR-15 and brandishing it at people. He was holding a teeny tiny BB gun, and this has been confirmed by viewing the Walmart tape footage. He had a little small gun. He was talking on the phone. The cops ran in and shot him. The dude that lied on to the 911 call, he hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been charged with manslaughter. He hasn't been charged with perjury, lying. The cops that shot him have not been reprimanded. Darren Wilson is still on a paid leave, which is being paid for by Mike Brown's parents, who are homeowners and taxpayers in the city of Ferguson, Missouri. And again, where does all this stem from? From minorities, people of color, and especially black people being on the bottom and white people being on the top. Accept it. That's life. That's truth. We all need to have some frank and serious discussions about race and about racism and about white privilege in this country before we can do anything. Otherwise, the match has been lit and the fuse is burning slow, but when it gets to the end, boom goes the dynamite. So, any white person that watches this, please don't feel attacked. I'm not attacking you. I'm just laying out the facts for you. That's all I'm trying to do in these videos, is give you guys things to think about, food for thought as always. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully I can get it up right away. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.